Hello. We're here to have a conversation, and that's one of the most delightful things in the whole world, to be able to sit down with a friend or with a person you haven't met before or know very little about, and to talk about life and to talk about the issues that are confronting individuals and the cares and the needs. And so it's just a sheer delightful time. I cannot think of any way that is better suited for how you spend your time. So it's always nice to have a good partner who will engage in this conversation. And Julia Doucet from the Open Door Clinic is with us today. Julia, would you like to tell the folks what it is you're doing and your responsibilities, but also about your particular story project that you have been working on, which is quite unique and quite special?
So my name is Julia, and I am the outreach nurse at the Open Door Clinic. So my job is primarily working with patients who don't have health insurance or who are underinsured, and especially with our Latino migrant farm workers, which make up about 50% of the patients that we see. So working with them and their unique challenges in getting them to access health care that they need. And the story project came out of an unmet need that we started seeing in the field. My colleague Naomi, who works up in the other counties, and myself had noticed an increase in mental health needs, in anxiety, depression, stress-related mental health needs, and we didn't know how to address those issues. A lot of our workers come from the southern states of Mexico, so they come from very poor subsistence farming places where mental health is not a culturally acceptable thing to do. There's a lot of cultural barriers to mental health care. It's when you're looking at just surviving with your basic needs, mental health care is something that just doesn't come into the picture. So we didn't think that just setting people up with a mental health counselor would be widely accepted. So in trying to figure out what we could do, I met with Jimena Mejia, who's the director of counseling up at Middlebury College, and we had a great conversation. She had worked with women migrant fern pickers in Florida. And as we were kind of wrapping things up, she said, you know, one of the things the women found was that there was power in telling and sharing their story. And that struck a nerve in a positive way. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. There's so much power in sharing your story, in having someone listen to you non-judgmentally and being able to just talk about what you've been through and have it out in the open. And there's a lot of freedom and acceptance that can come with sharing your story. So, so that was the first step. And then the other part is for people who might have experienced similar events, themes, experiences, being able to read about somebody else whose experience mirrors your own is also a really powerful experience and can make you feel less alone. So that was a great idea. But a lot of our population, about 30% of the Latino immigrant farm workers, have less than an 8th grade level of education. So literacy is a really big concern. So we couldn't just write down their stories and hand them a book full of words, because it really wouldn't be utilized. And just serendipitously, VPR had a story about the Center for Cartoon Studies, which is based in White River Junction. And they were talking about how they have students and they illustrate all sorts of things. And it just seemed like a perfect fit to combine a personal story with a cartoon. It's a culturally acceptable manner of conveying information. It's familiar and it's kind of fun. And so that's what we started. We found great partners in the Vermont Folk Life Center, UVM Extension Bridges to Health project, which is part of a consortium that the Open Door Clinic is in to provide access to health care statewide. and UVM, Department of Anthropology, and then Merrick Bennett's comic workshop, and he's a comic artist down in Lebanon, I believe. And so he was our resident cartoonist, graphic designer, and voice of reason and everything.
So you brought how did you brought all these people together? Did that work easily, or were there bumps along the way?
You know, it's a good question, and thanks to a very generous grant from the Vermont Community Foundation Innovations and Collaborations grant, we were able to pull everybody together. We started out in-person meetings. Everybody would make the ride, whether it was up to UVM or down to the Folk Life Center. Sometimes we met in the middle at one of our partners' houses. And as we went on, they became a little less frequent, but we continued to meet through Skype. So we would have very good, very important meetings and be able to communicate that way. I mean, one of the things that worked so well is that each partner brought in a unique skill set. And so we had Andy at the Vermont Folk Life Center, who is a self-defined comic geek, and he was able to connect the artist with the story. Naomi, who's with Bridges to Health, knows the population intimately, has a lot of great connections, so she was really out in the field collecting stories, as was I, and being able to drive the way the stories work. We found that the goal was to keep the voice of the storyteller as true as possible, and so she and I were tasked with making sure that the final version really reflected their voice as it had been when we recorded the story. And then Teresa, who is up at UVM Department of Anthropology, really came at it from an academic perspective and looking at making sure that we were staying true to the way that we collected the stories, and she really helped keep us together and organize meetings. And then Merrick, as I said, was our guru in the graphic design perspective, as well as a contributing artist.
Was this a new, sounds like a whole new collaboration? I mean, did you work with any of these folks before this particular project?
No, it was a coincidental meeting. Teresa was doing some research on migrant workers and food access, so looking at their access to nutritional food. And she had contacted me, and I had set her up being able to do her research in the waiting room of the clinic. And so she and I met that way. Turns out that Andy's wife is also a professor of anthropology and knew Teresa, so Teresa hooked us up with Andy. Andy knew Merrick, I knew Naomi. So we kind of all came together through
connections.
You know, Vermont way, the 2 degrees of separation.
How about with the migrant workers? How did they respond to this idea, which probably was the first time they hadn't thought about that, I suspect. So how did that go?
Well, there are some people who were right in line, right off, who wanted to tell their stories. They had things kind of bubbling up inside, and they really wanted to get that out. There were others who were more reserved when we broached the idea. Were a little less willing to share at first. As the project continued and we had the booklets that we could then share with people, and they had a little more idea of what the project was about, we had a lot of people interested, and we unfortunately couldn't actually talk with everybody, and we also weren't able to illustrate all the stories that we collected.
Okay. So it was a matter of selection.
Yeah, and Naomi and I had noticed through our work in the field that there were several themes that kept coming up, themes around separation, isolation, cultural isolation, techniques for dealing with those issues, whether they were use of alcohol or other negative responses to the stress, or positive, like we have a story from an artist, and he deals with his stress and his loneliness by creating beautiful artwork. Someone else chose to turn towards music, other people use religion. So we were looking at a wide variety of themes common themes that would be that would represent what we were seeing in the field.
So did that end up producing a new set of times and contacts with these individuals about this particular project that wouldn't ordinarily be there? Is that
Tell me more.
in terms, did you spend more time with the individuals than because they were working on this particular, getting their story? Did they enjoy that or have difficulty with that? Or?
Yeah. Well, let me talk you through the process.
Okay,
because
that
I
would
think
be
that will
helpful.
answer
Yeah.
your question. So, we would tell people about the project, and someone would say, "Oh, I have a story that I would like to tell, and it focuses on border crossing, or it focuses on leaving my family, or a story that happened while I was here." And sometimes people wouldn't even know what story they wanted to tell, but they knew that they wanted to talk to someone. And so we would arrange to go out to their house. In the beginning of the project, we had a set list of questions that we had developed, and we very quickly found that that turned it into an interview. And an interview is very different.
Yeah.
So we scrapped that. And so we would go with our little recorder to somebody's house with a cup of coffee or some pastries and just sit down and have a conversation like this. So we would start with, tell us a little bit about where you come from. Why did you decide to come here? Kind of generic questions. And then once they were feeling comfortable, we would just let them go. Usually the interviews would take about an hour and a half. And then we would have a recorded version of the conversation that would then need to be transcribed into text, translated into English, because we only had 2 artists who actually were bilingual. And then we would give the transcript to the artist would draw it. The artist would create the text first, the text bubbles, how they wanted that to run. That would go back to the worker, so we would sit down again for 45 minutes, go through the cartoon wording. They would say, "Oh, that looks great," or "No, that didn't happen quite like that. That makes it look like it happened too quickly. It happened very slowly," or that really happened after this. And then we would go back to the artist with the corrections. They would give us a pencil draft, go back to the worker, show them the way it was laid out. Usually by that point there were a few changes, but not very many, "Oh, well, when I was by the bridge, the water bottle was over there," or something like that. Or the detention center looked different. And go back to the artist. The artist would make the changes, do the inking, and give us the final draft. We would then take that and use the words from the cartoon, go back to the original transcript, take the Spanish out, and then we would have a final version that we would then bring back to the worker, have another sit down, and get the blessing from there.
How long would all that play out?
A lot longer than I thought. It depends.
I heard the description and I thought,
It took a lot longer than we expected. Artists are an amazing group of people with incredible talent. Speed is not always the highest priority, and so some artists happen to have a free schedule. They got it, they worked at it, and within a week we were done.
Yeah.
That happened a couple times.
But not always.
Most of them took months.
Yeah.
We're finishing up one now. I just got a rough draft that I need to bring back. It's a farm worker and a farm owner conversation that I need to bring back, and we had the original conversation in July. So
that takes
a
time.
little while. Yeah.
But does it? I assume it would build relationships.
Absolutely. One of the most gratifying was a woman who had opened up about an abusive relationship and leaving an abusive relationship, and she told the story, and then she said, I don't know that I want it out there. I'm afraid someone might identify who I am. I don't want people to know this about me. And and so we came up together with a way that we could change her story enough to keep it anonymous, but not enough that it would lose any of its meaning. And one of the most incredible things was not only was she brave enough to put her story out there to share with others, but she had never told that story before.
Oh my.
And she said it was the hardest thing she had ever done, to tell that story. And she said she felt so much better for telling it. And she was able to then take the cartoon and share that with her family. And it was an icebreaker. So instead of having to say, oh, remember, I don't know, Jose, I want you to read this.
But it is amazing when a person is able to get on the other side. Right? And because there's always, we hear about walls, and there are lots of walls that we really need to somehow circumvent.
Yeah.
And what a difference it can make.
Yeah. And I think more than ever, given our current political climate, that these stories really help the community understand the people that they're living with. They might be their neighbors, or they live down the road, or they happen to see them in Hannaford's. And it really provides a depth of understanding that they might not otherwise have.
So, what else have you, what do you think they have, the persons who participate in telling the story, what do you see them learning or appreciating or feeling relieved about?
Well, I'm not a
Without
psychologist, but I do think that once you put your story out there,
right,
you're able to look at it from afar. You're able to gain perspective that you might not otherwise have because it's not as deeply connected to you. Not that you give it up, and not that you, not that it's ever not a part of you, but it creates a space that I think allows some healing to happen. And do I think that the people who shared their stories are now feeling great and enthusiastic and moving on? No, I don't.
No.
But I do feel like it got them a couple inches, a couple feet away from the heaviness and the depth of despair or trauma that they were feeling, just slightly. And I think even that.
A couple. I really like your image of a couple inches, a couple feet, just slightly, because in reality that's how life does get measured, doesn't it? What have you learned from the process?
Well, that it's a never-ending process, that there is incredible value in stories, no matter what story they are, no matter, if it means enough to you to tell it, then it's valuable, and it's a gift. So I wish that I had more time, more resources to continue to collect stories and illustrate stories and, just continue the process, because it really is, it's a fascinating, incredible process to go through, and I've enjoyed every minute.
Did you ever think of yourself as someday I'm going to produce a book? Did you had that thought go through your head?
No. Although
it wasn't high on your list of things.
One of my little fantasies is, now that we have 12 finished individual stories, we have 6 in rough draft form coming down the chute, and we've had such great community interest. I had a professor from the University of Oregon in Eugene write and say, "Oh, I saw your project, and we want to use the stories in our classroom." And other places around the country have expressed interest.
When you talk community, you're talking not, here, but you're talking in the big sense, right?
Well, I was talking the little sense, but the little sense has grown big, and people are expressing interest in the project. And so one of the things that I would like to do is to take the stories, English and Spanish, put them into one big hardcover book and publish that for colleges or high schools to use either in Spanish language classes or anthropology or psychology classes. So that had a little introduction about the barriers faced by these patients, some of the mental health needs that they have, and then sharing the stories.
So is that a project you're currently working on or something?
It's my fantasy.
It's your fantasy.
It is.
Okay.
It's hard to justify because my job at the clinic is as a nurse, and a case manager. So I do some project development, but publishing a book is not really within my job description.
Well,
but I will do it.
It can become one of those things that draws you, and all of a sudden you're giving more time. And it's probably better doing that than playing card games on the computer. On your computer, so if you could substitute that time,
No, it will happen. I'm not quite there yet.
Okay, so you take pictures and write your story as you go along.
Yeah.
You're a journal person?
I was much more a journal person before kids.
Okay, so that influenced, right? So when you were a kid, were you the storyteller, or were you the one who listened to stories, or did you pay much attention to stories at that point? Do you remember?
I was the one who asked the questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
You asked.
I asked the questions.
How did that come out when you ask questions?
I think everyone likes to talk about themselves.
Right.
And so it was always easier and more comfortable for me to have someone else talking and have me be the one who kept their conversation going. So I would, whatever was interesting about trying to find common ground between a person, making some connection through having them tell me about who they were.
So you're a connector then? Is that your goal?
Sure.
To be a connector?
That's a good goal.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it is. It's one of the best gifts you could give. Because a lot of people don't work at it. And some people just don't care.
Yeah.
Because their focus is on, I want to tell you my story, and that means I want to tell you what I did. And unfortunately, storytelling gets sort of trapped sometimes when, well, gee, I can top that. And that really doesn't become story, because you're not owning something. Well, I'm going to get lecturing here, and I better not do that.
Well, I was going to start asking you questions, so we'll just turn this whole thing around.
That's all right. That's all right. Not that I wanted to do that, but I have strong convictions about, but try not to impose them at all. But so you were the one that asked the questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, my mother said to me, I'm a questioner. My mother said to me one day, they'll put on your tombstone, he asked most of the questions. And I thought, I was so shocked when she said that to me. But I thought about it, I thought, that's a worthy goal.
Yeah.
It's a worthy goal.
That's a much better epitaph than he never shut up.
Yes. Yes, and yeah, that's interesting. Would you like to show some of the booklets that you've created?
Sure.
So that people can see what we're talking about. We have a way to do that?
I think so. There they are.
There they are. Okay.
So that green one, the one that's up front, is a story about a woman who had to leave her kids back in Mexico to come over to provide for her family. It's called A Heart Split in Two, and it was talking about how she needed to be in the U.S. for her kids, but that split her heart because her kids were back home. Eventually she did get her kids up here, but not all of them. So her heart was always broken into The one behind it is a story about a guy who the first time he tried to cross over the border was kidnapped and held at gunpoint for 10 days and until his brother-in-law, who was already in the U.S., could wire money to the kidnappers. The people who kidnapped him were actually the same people who had helped him to cross the border in the first place. And he, since then, has crossed 5 other times by himself. So the third one there is a bilingual story. That's the one we were talking about before, about the artist. And he talks about how his focus is to stay to task, make money, send his kids to school. He has a son who just got accepted into college and a daughter who's already in college. And he's not willing to get a driver's license or to leave the farm except for medical appointments because he's not willing to take the risk of being sent home. So he spends the little free time that he has creating art. And then one is about a man from Guatemala who crossed over, and that's really focused on the border crossing. He had some traumatic events happen where 2 of the people in his group were left for dead. And then one story is the one we spoke about the woman who was leaving an abusive relationship. So, and then the last one is a family where the son was born in the U.S. when the family lived in Texas. The mom took the son back to live in Mexico. The dad moved up to Vermont. And that was looking at the reasons for leaving Mexico. The mom said she couldn't let her son out of her sight. There were drug gangs and other riffraff that, because they were getting money from the U.S., that the son was at risk for kidnapping, being held ransom, and she was not willing to let him out without someone, a grown-up, herself or her sister, watching him, and just how that was no way to raise a child. And so she made her way here last year, and her son, he was a U.S. citizen, was put on an airplane and was met here, and they're living together as a family in safety now.
A lot of courage, and a lot of apprehension, right?
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And are there's some other stories you're going to be working on? Is there something you could share with us about the Open Door Clinic itself, as you're connected to your work? But we may have people watching, sitting in on this conversation, who don't know about the Open Door Clinic. Could you give us a little background on the Open Door Clinic?
So the Open Door Clinic actually started as a little blue bus about 25 years ago. And they would travel through communities and provide care to people. And now we are a clinic based in Middlebury. We have our administrative office. We also have 2 mobile clinics, one in behind Porter Hospital and then one in Little City Family Practice in Vergennes. And I know we just spent the last half hour talking about the migrant worker patients, but we also have the other 50% of our patients, and those are Vermonters who don't happen to have health insurance. A lot of people who are self-employed or seasonally employed, where getting health insurance is not something that they can financially achieve. And so we see anyone who doesn't have health insurance who is at 300% of the federal poverty level or below. And we also see people who are underinsured, so who have a high deductible plan. So anyone who's an adult who meets those criteria is eligible to come and see us.
And so they connect, there's a phone number that they can call?
Sure.
Okay, want to give us
It is 802-388-0137.
Okay, and that would be in the phone book as well?
Yep, or online.
Or online, okay. And it's a matter of making the contact and then following through with the people who are willing to follow through with you.
Yep. We are always happy to have people call and see if they're eligible for our services.
Is an open door clinic unique in this particular area, or are there more such events and activities?
So we are a part of the VCCU, the Vermont Coalition for Clinics of the Uninsured, and there are 10 throughout the state. 5 are referral-only clinics, and 5 are
Right.
actually seeing patients.
Right.
So, contrary to our name, the Open Door Clinic, we are by appointment only. So we do ask that people call to make an appointment. But if anyone's watching from other parts of the state, there are other free clinics throughout the state that could meet their needs.
Good. We never know who's watching, and we know people are watching because I go to the grocery store and people tell me, I saw you on television. And I said, thank you. And so we're grateful for the public access television, which means I came up with this idea of getting behind stories and getting people to talk about stories. But others might want to do that around some other cause related to the common good, or related to some point of view that you want to share.
So can anyone get a public television or a cable television slot?
Yeah, we do not edit. We've had quite diverse experiences, and we provide this. We can provide the space, but we don't do the editing, and we don't. We welcome anything that communicates, that gives the common dialogue, community dialogue. And there's a wide range of things that are going on. In fact, most of our product, we produce a lot of local television. And I think we're at that magic hour where we've come to 28 minutes or more, but we try to stay within that time limit. We thank you for coming and sharing your story and sharing the books and telling us about this very important story project and these very important people that you're giving support to.
Well, thank you for having me on today.
Okay, thank you.